Hey everybody, it's Steve Shapiro. Coming up, I'm going to show you 7 tips for getting pro results on your recordings. My main instrument is vibraphone, so I'm going to use that and show you 2 different cost-effective microphones that'll give you great results on your sessions. A lot of people have asked me over the years for my opinion on microphones and recording, especially for acoustic instruments like vibraphone and percussion. So I was recently speaking with my friend Tony Maselli, who has a great website, vibesworkshop.com. If you haven't checked it out, there are lessons and performances and all sorts of great info, so please do, vibesworkshop.com. I told Tony I would cover some of the subject in a little more detail and share some of what I've learned basically from some really incredible audio engineers, people like Roger Nichols or Larry Swist or Jeff Daking. Having the chance to work with those people, I saw everything they did, paid a lot of attention to how they set things up. And whenever I had the chance, I asked a lot of questions. So here is some of what I've learned. Okay, so here are my top 7 tips for pro recording results. Number 1 is environment. That includes minimizing reflections and isolation. Number 2 is mic selection. That speaks for itself. Number 3 is mic positioning. That also speaks for itself. Number 4 is signal path. This includes your cabling, it includes your audio interface, and your clock source, and especially your mic preamp. 5 is level optimization. Number 6 is your post-production, mixing, and your use of plugins. And number 7 is the mastering stage. All right, so first, let's talk about your environment. One thing I see all the time when I see people recording themselves in a video is that they might be set up right next to a very hard surface like a sheetrock wall. Well, that's not really the way to get the best sound, because that wall is going to create some strange reflections that go back into the microphones. So the number one thing I recommend to do is to treat the surfaces in your environment. You can see here, I've got a little space that I've created, and there's moving blankets and some baffling. And where there's plexiglass, the plexiglass has some bends to it so that it doesn't create just a flat surface for sound waves to bounce off of. Then, after minimizing those reflections, you want to consider isolation. So in this situation, I'm set up to record here with the drums. And if you see, we've got the plexiglass clear sonic panel, and we've got some moving blankets. And without that, what's going to happen is all of the sound energy from the cymbals is going to travel right over here and get into these microphones that are on the Vibes. And you really don't want that, because it's going to make it really tough to mix later, because you won't be able to get all that high frequency information from the cymbals out of the Vibe mics. You won't be able to separate the sounds very well in the mix. So if you're playing solo, you don't have to really worry about this because there are no other instruments. But when you are playing in a room with other instruments, you do want to consider about isolating yourself and isolating the microphones. So one idea, if you want to help break up the sound on the surfaces, is set up near a bookshelf. All the little nooks and crannies in the bookshelf really act to diffuse those reflections, and they can help you really get a better sound. Okay, so let's get down to one of the most asked questions, which is, what microphone should I use? Microphone selection. Well, this is an Audio-Technica 4033 large cardioid condenser microphone. We're going to demo this microphone in this video, along with a small diaphragm condenser. This is the Studio Project C4. This is modeled after the Neumann KM84, but it's about a quarter of the price. This is its own design, but not unlike a Neumann U87, which is the gold standard. So U87 costs about $3,500 for one mic. So a stereo pair will run you $7,000. This mic is much less expensive. It's about a $400 microphone. This one may be a $200 microphone. The KM84 is about an $800 microphone. So this is a quarter of the price. So these are inexpensive solutions that are very similar to the most high-end microphones. There are many others that are made a lot of mid and low price microphones these days are fantastic. I also really like the Warm Audio mics. They make a W47 and a W87, which are based on the Neumann designs. So what you're going to find in these microphones, the large diaphragm condenser is going to give you that kind of warmth and body. So I would really prefer it on an instrument like vibraphone when you really want to pick up that the full body of the sound. The small diaphragm condenser microphone, the smaller the element, it can react a little quicker to high frequencies. So it's very good for that top end type of thing. It may not give you the full body you always want. It's great on stuff like xylophones or acoustic guitars, where you want to catch those top transients really accurately. But it won't give you as much body as the large diaphragm condenser. So this is basically, for me, the main choices for percussion instruments, piano, strings. You can use a large diaphragm condenser on vocals. U87 is a great vocal mic. It's really the gold standard. So there are different other types of microphones that we're not going to really show in this video. One are dynamic microphones, which have great uses on drums. They're punchier. Also ribbon microphones, which I tend to prefer on brass instruments, but you can use those on percussion as well. All right, so let's talk mic positioning now. I prefer to have the microphones evenly spaced over an instrument such as this, as close as possible without getting in the way. That way you're picking up as much instrument as possible and as little room sound as possible. The further away the mics are, the more room sound you're going to get. In this situation, I mean, there are many different ways of positioning stereo pairs of microphones, such as arrays and XY patterns, but I really prefer just to straight up, right above the instrument, capturing stereo detail. So the next thing I want to mention is signal path. What does that mean? Well, that means start with good quality cables. Don't use cheap cables. They do make a difference. So the next part of your signal path is going to be your mic preamp, which is pretty much just as important as the microphone, in my opinion. This is a great Allen & Heath console that's filled with good mic preamps on every channel, solid state preamps. But I'm going to go one better, and I'm going to go over here and use this TLA tube compressor preamp. And this just really takes it to the next level. It's Class A electronics. It's got tube warmth that gives a tremendous amount of detail. This preamp, by the way, since it has a compressor in it, you need to be very careful you don't overdrive the compressor on input. Just get a clean signal, and that's feeding into a Motu 896 audio interface going into the computer, and that's being clocked here by an Apogee digital word clock. So it's a pretty sophisticated setup. Most of you are going to just have a standard audio interface, something like a Focusrite Scarlett, PreSonus, or a Zoom. And in that case, everything's built into the interface. Your audio interface with the preamp and the word clock, it's all built into one unit. And that is perfectly fine, and you can get great results with that. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is level optimization. You see this 10 dB pad on the microphone? We are going to use that. For an instrument that's percussive and fairly loud, very important to use the pad. Next, let's talk input level. On your interface, you want it to be full and solid without clipping it all into the red. And you will also notice on the screen, you want to see the waveform fill up the display and not be truncated or clipped at all at the top. You want to get all the peaks retained without being clipped. If they are clipped, it's going to look something more like this, where the tops are cut off. I'm zooming in, and that's what it starts to look like. Where you see those square edges, you don't want to see that at all. When you're fully zoomed out, you want to make sure that all of those peaks are being maintained. And then your levels are set, and we're ready to record. listening back, you can hear that the small diaphragm microphone has more detail. It's a little thinner sound, but it gives it almost a really sweet sound. These mics perform better than I thought against the Audio Technicas. They sound really good. All right, so here we are at the last step of our process: post-production, mixing, and mastering. So this is a huge subject. We could go on for hours and many videos just on this part of the process alone. But I'm just going to show you here what you've been hearing and what I've been using in this video for both the channel plugins and for mastering. So first, on the Vibe channel itself, which is the track I recorded to, I'm running a number of different plugins, starting here with the Waves Renaissance channel, which provides both EQ and compression. The EQ, I'm only using very tiny little frequencies that are boosted just in certain areas I like. You really could take the EQ off and it would be probably fine, but it just adds a little detail. As far as the compression, I use a very low ratio. Here it's at 2.8, 2.9. And also, with a percussive sound like Vibes, you want to make sure that you don't clip the attack. So use a long attack. This is set to 60 here, or 61. And then for the release, I usually use the ARC, the auto release control. That does just fine. So that's the first stage of the channel. Then I use this next plugin, which is a Waves Maserati series. It's a really great specialized plugin set to keyboards. It provides just a little more kind of a compression stage with a little EQ added. After this is a panning plugin, the S1 Stereo Imager. I use this to fix the stereo field. For example, I just didn't hear quite enough of the low end of the Vibes, so I use this asymmetry to bring the low end up a little. I also am using the width to just tighten the stereo field just slightly, because the two mics separately, they can be imaged a little more clearly if they get tightened up a bit. So that's it. And then there's just one simple reverb on here, which is a Sound Toys Little Plate. This is a really great sounding native reverb. It's set to a very low decay time, for like 1 second. And I do add a little modulation, which gives it some of the kind of old school analog sound. And that's about it on the Vibes channel. Alright, so here we are in the mastering stage. These are the plugins I have on my mastering channel, which is the main output from this session. The first one is a Universal Audio Pultec equalizer. I have a UAD2 card in this computer, which I love from Universal Audio. And this is just a great program equalizer. Can add a little bit of extra sheen, clean up a little low end with it. The next plugin that I use in my mastering chain is a good multi-band compressor. This one is the Waves L3LL. And then I do run one more last output compressor, which is the UAD Precision Limiter. And this UAD limiter is just the very last output stage. It's just where I add just a little more level, or maybe even take a little bit away. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video and hope you learned something. Please go to YouTube/vibraphonic music and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.